All right. Continuing the theme of visionary experience, we have our next speaker, John F. Simon Jr. John is a fine artist, digital artist. He was a pioneer in the early computer software movement, which started in the mid-'80s, around the same time computer software really started kicking off. And today he's going to be sharing a bit about his path with drawing as a contemplative practice. And you hear often things like, running is my contemplative practice, or drawing is my contemplative practice. Well, for John, really, really, really true. This was his contemplative practice. And he's going to share a bit about his path and what he discovered through using the simple act of drawing. So, welcome, John Simon, to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, wow, it's happening. Here we are. Lots of planning, lots of thinking. So I'm going to tell you a story today about a young artist who was struggling in New York to make it in the gallery scene. And I'm going to pick 2 or 3 artworks that were sort of key in that process, looking for sort of commercial success, and then eventually finding something much broader, and hopefully sharing that with you. How many of you do something creative? I'm really curious. Yeah, I thought so. But you'll tune into it. There's just some kind of natural affinity, I think, between openness and mindfulness and creative practice. So I don't have really any Buddhist lineage, but I'll point to a lineage in the art world where I learned to make work. It goes back to Marcel Duchamp in the early 1900s and through the Bauhaus, where there were many analytical thinkers. This is a work from 1969 from an artist named Sol LeWitt, and it was the peak of what's called conceptual art. And I thought there was some sort of association between working with your mind to create art and working with your mind to find more openness. So Sol LeWitt took vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines and did all the combinations of them. A very simple system, repeated the system and created this work in this sort of grid format. Also 1969 was the rising of cybernetics. It was a big time for IBM and the Apollo program, when computers were becoming part of the cultural dialogue. Well, computers are the whole thing now, taken over. So this was my experience in 1984 to see these little pictures, and I loved these little pictures. I loved these little pictures, and I loved that little machine that made those pictures. And I really liked the process of conceptual art, that I could come up with I didn't have to be an artist that saw something and rendered well, which I didn't do very well. I could be an artist that used this equipment to open up and explore new worlds. So down here is the Photoshop icon. You can see if you blow it up, it's broken up into these little dots, these little pixels. And the icons were 32 pixels by 32 pixels by black and white. So that seemed like a real simple format. And I thought, well, instead of deciding on a picture and then rendering it out, what I would do is I would write a program that would just rearrange all these little black and white squares in all these different ways. And I would see the entire catalog of all the icons possible. So I made a project called Every Icon. Yeah, we'll put it up live if we can. There it is. So it's still running. There it is on my website. It's possible to go see it. It starts in the upper left-hand corner. Some people already got the joke there. The upper left-hand corner, it starts with a blank grid. It shows you about 100 per second. And it rearranges all combinations of black and white squares. And so just in a matter of time, you'll be able to see all the icons that are possible. After a couple of days, I thought it wasn't working. To do the first line, whoop, oh, that's okay. To do the first line at this speed takes about 3 months. And to show all the possible combinations of the first 2 lines at this speed takes about 500 million years. So, this was like the nuclear power of images. So many possible images in this tiny space of the icon. you know, this was the very first time I sort of touched that vastness, that sort of unimaginable set of possibilities that was, you know, all possible artworks. So to echo that vow, you know, there are unlimited images. I vow to see them all. Somebody at that time told me, oh, what you've done is you've created a visualization of a kalpa. Now, I didn't know what a kalpa was. You might know. There's in the Zen tradition, there's many different stories of it, but imagine a mountain made of stone and a monk comes out with a silk rag once a year and wipes the mountain, and when the mountain is gone, that's a kalpa. So there are these unimaginable vastness that you encounter when you open up your mind and sort of see into it. Okay, we could switch back. So after I'd done every picture, what was there left to do? So what it forced me into was to recognize that anything I bring forward, anything I manifest forward in the world from the complete unknown had some decision on my part. It reflected me. There was no way to escape that. So I decided what I would do is I would try to write an artificial intelligence software that would be creative. I would do the AI one better. It would be an artist AI. And so I went through a lot of the AI techniques of the time. This was emergent behavior here on the left, and a project called CPU. And over here, A-Life, which is itself a technique which uses genetic algorithms and fitness functions and choices. And every piece of software I wrote was not the technical solution to a problem. It was really more like a piece of creative writing. It was me making decisions about what these colors should be, what the shape should be, how the screen should be laid out, whether there's a grid in the middle, whether it's in circles, all these decisions. So I couldn't escape myself in these decisions. And I couldn't make the set of rules that I was writing for the software through these A-Life techniques do anything but really what they were programmed to do. So what was next? What was next was that I developed an introspective technique strictly to study the rules that I had unspoken for making the drawing, because if I could solve this AI, it would really sell well. It would be really great work. So unknowing of any tradition of introspection, what I did was I sat down at a drawing table and I standardized into these cards. No reason, but the size paper I had cut up well into this size at the time, so I've stuck with it. And I've laid out on the table over here, which I'll keep up for, I'll leave that up through lunch, so you can see some of the daily drawings. And what I did was I sat down, and I just had no idea what I would draw. I sat down with a blank card, and I waited. And just whatever started to arise, whatever movement started to arise, I would draw. And everybody's kind of done this with doodling. You let a mark go, and then you think, well, maybe it should go this way, and then, over that way. And I tried to observe, self-observe, what would happen if I did that, thinking analytically that what would happen is I'd get the rules. I'd find the source of my own creativity, like the source of the Nile. I'd travel upstream, and I'd figure out how it was I was coming up with all this stuff. Well, it doesn't go back to a single point, I can tell you that. What happened was that it broadened out, and it broadened out bigger than art. It broadened out into my whole life. And from 1999 to now, it's been a daily practice for me to sit and draw and to allow. And never in all that time of some 5,000 cards now, something like that, has there been any repeats or anything often like anything. Sometime in 2008, and I'll talk about that transition time in a second, around 2008 I started a site called iClock.com where I decided it would be important not only to do the work but to share it. And so I put up a drawing every day, and often some writing. Some people I know who've had similar experiences to mine, this kind of opening experiences, do it through journaling. They also, some people sit and write every day in a kind of open way and just write whatever happens, which is a great practice. And so also on iClock I started doing some of that. So some of the drawings have writing with them, and I'll read you a couple of pieces in a second. Just check my time. Okay, we're good. So iClock.com became a way to show them and display them. And one idea I had after I realized that it was not going to be an artificial intelligence creative software, but something else was going on, how do I decide then which ones to look at? How do I decide which ones to bring forward? Because I wanted the source of my work to be this kind of self-reflection rather than an analytical conceptual art style. What I did was I started to look at what was persistent. So maybe not every day the same, but maybe over the course of weeks or the course of months, some of the drawings became persistent. And in this case, I called them cycle drawings. I didn't really, I mean, I make up stories. Everyone makes up stories. And part of the writing and the journaling process was to make up the story. And people would say, well, you're just making it up. And I would say, well, yes, I'm just making it up. But what is it I'm making up? What's the story I'm telling? So I made these stories about the cycles. And I try to get a good story going. Because, you know, when you're showing your art, you have to give a little story, show the collectors that it's about something. So I made some stories up. And okay, these were my daily cycles. We go through a cycle every day. We go through emotional cycles. I came up with all kinds of stories. And I even got into, like, I'm going to do some academic research so I could put footnotes in, and I found Carl Jung, that was at that time, and he talked a lot about symbols, and I thought, well, maybe they're symbols, and he even wrote a book called Mandala Symbology, where he allowed patients to make drawings in therapy, and they often came up with cycles like this, so things started to get a little freaky. And also they came up with serpentine lines, and I was coming up with these rivers, and I was explaining these as streams of consciousness or something like that. I'm sure I had a good story at the time about it. He talked about totality symbols. That was another term that he used, totality symbols. So how is this a total? This is a total. But I was very focused on the squares, going square to square. This would be a moment in time, and the next moment in time. This is a more calm one. This is a more turbulent one. Okay. So around 2008, the change came. And I've just put this up from Wikipedia. This is a classic example of what's called a figure-ground reversal. And actually, I've heard that term used during this conference several times. And so, is it a vase or is it two faces? That's the vase or faces. Well, it's both and it's neither. It's both at the same time. And even I found in researching this, and I had no idea that the talk was out there, but Shinzen Young, who's no stranger to the Buddhist Geeks, wrote about the figure ground in terms of his practice, noting practice. When you're noting vanishings, he says, you become the nothing. You're the thing you're noting, the ground. You unbecome thoughts and body sensations. So I wish I'd have had that teaching back at the time. But there's this reversal from the ground that that surrounds you to the idea of yourself. And so what happened for me around September 2009 was that I made this this is the day of the transition that it took place. The 13th of September 2009, I made the image on the left, and this is what I wrote. I was in the midst of this analytical storytelling going on, and I wrote, the cycle, because I was calling these still cycle drawings, the cycle is becoming my most persistent image. Layers of meaning keep occurring to me. My most basic readings of the cycle symbol are that it represents one or more of the following, : a recurring series of moments, an array of phylogons, a looping thought, unconscious self-reflection, thoughts protecting an inner meaning, an awake mind, an imperfect circle, or a broken mandala. So I was kind of brainstorming, what could this symbol mean, what could it be? And then overnight, the thing that occurred to me was thoughts protecting an inner meaning. What could be occurring was not the whole minutia of this energy and symbol and line and color that was surrounded, but it was the thing in the center that was being protected. And I saw for the first time the next day this profile appear. But the profile wasn't the stuff I was drawing. It was the stuff that I wasn't drawing. The no-self became apparent, and I wrote, the confluence of fragmented thought streams become a flood of ideas. So it occurs to me that all of the things in my life, the moments, the way I identify myself, my sort of conscious mind that's thinking, is all the surrounding for the thing that's in the center, here, represented by this, this profile, this no self. So of course I thought I'd thought of something that no one had ever thought of before. I'd made this amazing discovery out in the art world here. And I started to make them bigger. So here's a no-self-portrait that was taken in from the 5x6 card, and it was cut with a CNC machine and coated with Formica and made very nice for the gallery. And here it is down in the gallery. There were three shown as a triptych, three no-self-portraits. And in all these cases, the surrounding part is material, is wood and color and texture and surface, and the center is open. There's a hole there in the material, so that the thing really is nothing. Okay. So onward. So first it was every icon, very analytical, the mind, and then it was the no-self portrait, and the surrounding, so the no mind. And so then what happens, as we heard a little bit yesterday, it all sort of comes in balance, comes in a union of opposites. And this is the persistence that I'm getting today, and you'll see a lot of examples over there. And I actually also offer you the opportunity to share, readings as well, because I think I haven't yet maybe made that transition in this work, although it's sort of becoming more and more apparent. This was the drawing from one day, and I started to see that what started in the frame, this I would say is like my context in which I'm setting up my expectations, how I see myself, how I see my life. Something starts, and then slowly it grows to a point where it exceeds the bounds of that frame. So by this time I had gone from that no-self in search of teachings, and found that there were, in fact, these teachings, and that this wisdom had come up spontaneously, but there were quicker ways to get it. So, I mean, if you look at, say, mastering core teachings of the Buddha, I would say that that's like the superhighway, but direct path kind of thing. I feel like I bushwhacked up the back of the mindfulness mountain on some crooked trail. But here I am out of the brush, and so by this time I had gotten more teachings, and I'd begun to practice and sit, and I think I was starting to feel that the context in which and the identities in which I held my life, I was sort of breaching. This was kind of what was coming up in the drawing for me, and just to show you, if you're geeky, a little bit about the process. So I take the drawing, and here's Adobe Illustrator. I scan it and I outline it in Illustrator, and of course all these parts of the process have their own interesting twists and turns and additions. Here's a software called Rhinoceros, or we call it Rhino, where the flat drawing is brought out in 3D. And then here, this piece is 6 feet by 5 feet in size, and it's carved on a CNC machine, which is a great big machine that holds a router bit, and it goes back and forth like a printer, but it has a Z dimension, so it goes up and down. So I use a material called HDU, and I carve it, then I paint it, and that's how I make these kind of sculptural works. So these are some of the sketches for what I've been calling the expansion series. And I began to read them. Broadly, more broadly, and I didn't even in the beginning read them in relation to my own practice. I actually started thinking about them in terms of expansion of industrial society. It was kind of a great concern, environmental concern of mine, that we're using up too much of what we've got, and in some ways, as a species, we've exceeded the bounds of the frame that we have. If the Earth and our resources are the frame that we live in, this is signaling to me that we're coming to the limits of the bounds of the frame, there's many other readings, and it took about 2 or 3 months before I started to read it the other way. So it was, in the beginning, it was a little bit alarming, like, oh, I'm signaling to myself that we're exceeding resource bounds. But on the other hand, it can also be seen as a creative thing. So if you start on the right and read to the left, here's the chaos, and the practice of manifesting, the practice of making art, is taking from that vastness that was every icon, all possibilities, and bringing it down into a single point. And there was another reading, I got this, during this conference, you want to say this weekend, but it started on Thursday, this weekend in the meditations, that, okay, on one hand you have concentration practice. You have this kind of narrowing to a single point in practice, and there is a practice where you try to get down to a single point. And on the other hand, in the other end of the extreme, you have this openness, this vast openness. So your bare awareness, I think, would be a way to say it. So it might be the balance of those two, concentration practice and insight practice together. So this is the piece that has come out. It's 16 feet by 9 feet tall, and it has this charcoal line on it. I'll show you another one. That's me in the middle of the polar vortex last winter standing next to it. But it'll give you an idea of the scale. And on here is this kind of looping line. So how did contemplative practice, this is the other piece to point out in this, how did contemplative practice, now a regular part of my studio practice, add to or converge with the creative practice? Well, I was talking to Vince, and he was saying, you should just do more sitting. You should do sitting and do concentration practice, because when you look at the card practice, it's really an insight practice. It's really watching your own thoughts come up and dealing with them. So what would just sitting and following the breath do? So over time, I kind of got where I could observe the breath coming in and out. Of course, then when you first get that instruction, you're like, took a long time, then relax. Okay, don't breathe yourself, let yourself breathe, and observe your breath. Okay, so I started to observe my breath. This was like if I was a runner and I would say, I'm a runner, I don't need to go to the gym and do leg curls, but then you actually did go to the gym and did them, and you got back out on the track, you feel like, hey, I got some greater strength. So when I went back to the drawing after kind of learning carefully to allow the breathing to occur, it turned out I had a lot of strength in allowing the drawing to come up. So I was no longer struggling with whether or not I was influencing the drawing, how much am I influencing the drawing. It was just a really natural way to open up and let the drawing come up. And the result of that over the summer, a year ago, summer of 2013, is that the heavy lines that characterize a lot of my work went away, and the brush strokes just came out, and the color came out. So it was the observable changes from different views, different meditative views, changed the kind of results of the drawing, which was interesting. And I had this whole piece built. It was all surfaced. It was all primed. And I had to put this charcoal line on last. That was just the way the process went. So you can imagine the fear of approaching this piece, and you basically have the moment, the one time to make it work. And that really was where that practice paid off, because I could be this moment just like every moment, and making the lines and being aware. And I think the success of that piece, the union of the kind of industrial and chaotic with the hand-drawn and the softer lines together, I think it works well together, and the lines are well understood, and they're very clear, I think also because the mindfulness that was applied during the process. So that's the sort of transitions and where it's going, and I invite you to come over and see the work there. And also, if you'd like to try it yourself, 2:30 today, I brought a bunch of materials, paper, pencils, and if you do drawing practice, I invite you to come and share. And if you've never done drawing, even better. There's no expectation. So come and try and see what arises. So thank you. Thank you for your time.